Okay, we have folks. Isaac, it's been a long time since I've seen you on this meeting.
You know, I have a conflict every week, but this week is no meetings week in my organization. So this week I don't have a conflict, but I can come to another meeting.
Got it. Got it. Because I've been wondering about that blog that you talked about a long time ago.
I know, and it's still amazing. I actually have a personal objective to do that, and 2 other posts this quarter. So
Wow.
it's now even my manager is starting to hassle me about it. You can rest assured.
Oh, so okay, so let's get started now that people and I'm sorry you're cold, Isaac. I'm sure the Riesling, if you drink some, it'll keep you a little warm. Okay, Isaac. Well, since I brought it up and you're on before I lose you, tell us about the blog. That I believe it was about, if I remember correctly, the difference between like the SLSA, the attestation piece versus, I think, oh man, I can't remember the other one. Was it CNCF? I don't remember. It was so long ago.
You know what? I'm just on my iPad. Let me just start back in on my PC, and I'll throw something up on the screen. I'll show you I'll share with you what I was able to blog about.
Awesome. Okay. And then outside of that, once we wait for Isaac to share his screen, I know we've been working on the development blog, and I think Jay, you were on yesterday's meeting. I think Isaac, you were on yesterday's meeting too, potentially. I think we're unblocked now. And so based off that verbiage, I've been documenting some use cases for like the benefits from a developer's point of view. So I wrote, I do this all the time, right? Where I'm like messing on my local laptop in a YAML file, and then I forget that I've done something, and I go to potentially commit or build, and I've forgotten that I've done that, right? So, SLSA level 1 helps prevent something like that. Or adding additional code that maybe, I needed to do something testing or whatnot. It's not supposed to be in there. In my understanding of SLSA level 1, it's supposed to help prevent something like that because it's not matching the upstream when you go to build. And then I think I made another one about, understanding dependencies. Like, I don't know, somebody might want to see if it's secure, or they want to, make it more lightweight. And the SBOM potentially could help with something like that. So I kind of started doing this a little bit ago to document why a developer would want to consider SLSA. But obviously we can keep working on that and refining that. That was just kind of off the cuff after the discussion yesterday, what I was thinking about. You ready, Isaac? Oh, you're on mute. No, still on mute. Or am I on mute?
Oh, yeah, no, I
Okay,
can't hear Isaac. Yeah,
just can't hear Isaac, and I don't think he's on mute. I don't know. It might be something with his mic.
Yeah, and I can see he has a big mic.
Yeah. Oh wow, yes, he does. I think he lost internet. He just left. So hopefully we'll get him back here soon. But oh, there he goes. Can you hear us now, Isaac? You got us? Oh, yay, we hear you.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, AirPods it is. We got my video. So actually, so I can show you, I have a narrative in deck form, which I was hoping to turn into a blog. And what I can do is show you the deck and give you a sense of where I'm at overall, if that's helpful.
For me.
So let me throw it up here. Okay, so share my screen. So I think, so I have a number of slides here. Can you all see my screen right now?
Yep.
Can you still see it if I do this?
Yep, even better.
Okay, so this diagram here it's bigger than SLSA, but I think has relevancy to how we think about SLSA and how we think about the layers above and below SLSA in the overall stack. And so this diagram was posted on the Google blog last week, along with the launch of Guac, which is another kind of adjacent project here. And I wanted to kind of explain how these pieces fit together, and that's kind of where this idea of attestations come from. If I back up to what I think is the core problem that we're trying to solve around supply chain, it's this one, right? That particularly for open source, that open source software, yes, it brings tremendous value. That's why it's in 97% of commercial software. Folks get tremendous value from relying and depending on open source software, but it brings significant latent security risk. And I think one of the keywords to highlight there is latent, in that people are aware that it brings security risk, but it's mostly hidden and unquantifiable. It's very difficult to reason about. And so I think the core problem, with OSS supply chain in the large, is this one. Yes, there are parts of OpenSSF which are looking to, fix vulnerabilities faster and make things more secure by default. But I think, independent of those efforts, we're always going to have to reason about an imperfect supply chain. We're always going to have to reason about a supply chain with vulnerabilities and deficiencies upstream of us. And so the challenge then is become, how do we assess and reason about the risk in order to manage and mitigate that risk? And so I'm not going to go through all of these slides, but I think at its core, having transparency, trust, and control. Transparency, I want to be able to see what's there and understand the risk and the signals that I'm seeing. Trust, I need to be able to believe in the data. I need to have a reason that I can trust metadata that I'm seeing in a supply chain upstream of me. And then ultimately control. This is where the rubber meets the road. I need to be able to take actions to manage, mitigate, systematically reduce the risk that I'm importing into my supply chain. Again, I'm going to skip over these slides. This is what I'm going to be blogging about, but this diagram here is a more detailed version of this one. So I am going to talk a little bit about this. If you look at OpenSSF overall, SigStore at its base, I think, provides this trust foundation. What does SigStore provide? It provides a way of signing attestations, as providing strong links to identity. There's work going on with distributed timestamping in order to federate this trust foundation and anchor flexibly in roots of trust. And so if you think of this box at the bottom as more or less analogous to, this is the role that SigStore plays in the ecosystem, is providing this foundation of trust. What you can then imagine layering on top of that is a layer of attestations and metadata referring to supply chain artifacts. And so SLSA, yes, is one part of it. SLSA provenance is certainly relevant when assessing, risk of artifacts that you're bringing into your supply chain. But so are SBONs, so is OSD and VEX. OpenSSF scorecards is a relevant signal there as well. Things like lifecycle events. If I'm importing a library into my supply chain, it would be useful to know that one of the maintainers of that library, their email domain just expired and was re-registered by someone else last week. That seems pertinent to assessing the overall risk of this thing. And so if you can imagine having attestations that are signed with SigStore pertaining to entities in the supply chain, you can then begin to trust those attestations. The problem you then have is that SLSA provenance attaches to an artifact. OSDs are keyed on vulnerability. Scorecards refer to a repo. Developer reputation attaches to a developer who may be working in a repo. Lifecycle events to a project which may have many repos. And so these attestations and metadata here are all attached to different entities in the ecosystem which have an implicit graph between them. And so the role of Guac, if any of you saw Guac at KubeCon last week, or have seen Guac showing up on OpenSSF and SigStore and other Slacks, is really the layer above, aggregation and synthesis, where we'd like to be able to, for a given artifact, reason about all of the metadata which we can attach to the artifact, even transitively. And so, yes, I'd like to know about the SLSA provenance for the artifact. I'd also like to be able to figure out, what's the OpenSSF scorecard score for the repo from which the artifact was built? Do I have any threat intelligence data about the project or people working on it, other life cycle events? And so Guac is an attempt to reify that implicit graph and aggregate all of these signals together across all of these different attestations and metadata types. And then at the very top, if we have trust at the bottom, we've then got attestations and metadata one level up from that. Aggregation and synthesis is about turning that data into meaning. What can I extract in terms of all this sea of data? What meaning can I extract? And then at the top layer here, policy and insight, is how do I turn that meaning into value? And I can think about turning that meaning into value for a variety of different audiences. And so given, an overall holistic risk assessment for, elements upstream of me in the supply chain, I can drive policy in my own operations. I can perform risk and compliance assessments, developer assistance even. You could imagine in an IDE when a developer imports a new library, being able to provide intelligence about that import. What risk did you just add to your supply chain? Governance and so on. And so policy and insight here, you can imagine, again, your data, aggregation, synthesis, convert to meaning, and then turn that meaning into actual value for a variety of audiences. And so overall, what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of how these various parts of OpenSSF and the ecosystem at large fit together into a, not want to be too corny, but into a synergistic whole, right? Like the fact that OpenSSF has SIGSTOR as a project, and it has SLSA as a project, and we have an SBOM everywhere work stream, and we have S scorecards as a project. The fact that we now have Guac incubating this aggregation and synthesis layer, I think that we can do a much better job of painting the overall picture of how do these pieces fit together into a coherent whole, which provides value vertically all the way up to various audiences at the top. And so that's essentially, I've just given you the 7-minute spiel with some slides of what I hope to turn into a blog post around how do these pieces together, and how should we be looking at, if I have, given SLSA provenance signed in SIGSTOR, how is that meaningful in the large? If I zoom out, how does that actually help me do anything? Well, it helps you do things through this stack here. And the same for OSV, for scorecards, for SBOM, even first-party proprietary data you might imagine aggregating to. Is that helpful? Does that make sense? And yeah, is this worthwhile blogging about?
So I have 2 things. I do like this. I think it's incredibly useful, especially this picture, right? I'm very much a picture person, so I really like this picture. My question is more around, I see this as 2 different blogs. There's everything you just talked about as one blog, but it's not necessarily SLSA positioning. But then how do you take this and position SLSA for a specific blog, right? Or a blog specifically to SLSA, right? Because there's the whole thing that you want to talk about and completely understand. But we also want to make sure that we position SLSA in a separate blog to say, this is why you should use SLSA from this perspective, or how would you go about doing that?
I think that's true. And so I think part of, in my mind, when I'm imagining this, I'm imagining like kind of telling this story layer by layer, essentially. And so at the attestations and metadata layer, you can imagine telling a story about how these pieces are complementary and different. We've dealt with some confusion early on, like 6 months ago, around SBOM and SLSA. People look at SLSA, people look at SBOM, they're the same thing. Wait, is one a subset of the other? How should I think about these 2 things? And gradually we've teased them apart, and we posted on the OpenSSF blog a post or 2 about how SBOM and SLSA are different and complementary. And so I think that part of positioning SLSA is painting this picture that SLSA is a part of an overall metadata ecosystem. Here is the specific parts of the supply chain, or here's the types of data that SLSA is useful in reasoning about, or the types of risk, I should say, that SLSA is useful in reasoning about. Here's what SBOM is useful for reasoning about. Here's how scorecards can help you. And so I think positioning SLSA is about telling the story of this metadata layer, and explaining, what makes SLSA interesting and different, and usefully differentiated from all the other signals that we're seeing. 2023 with the executive order, with the OMB memo coming out last month, 2023, we're going to wake up and find ourselves absolutely awash in a sea of SBOMs. We're going to find SBOMs absolutely everywhere, which I think makes this aggregation and synthesis problem particularly pressing. But SLSA as well, as SLSA gains in adoption, we're going to find more and more SLSA provenance attestations out there in the wild. And so helping people understand, how do I reason about them? What does this mean? And how do I tease apart the meaning of SLSA provenance as distinct from an inventory of ingredients in an SBOM or an OpenSSF scorecard, or even, in attestations and metadata, you could imagine S2C2F being in here as well, that, you know, at an artifact or an organizational level, being able to reason about what would the, you know, dependency management practices which are upstream of me in a supply chain. It's in the data point, which we then need to synthesize. And so I think positioning SLSA against S2C2F is a similar, it's an analogous problem to positioning SLSA against scorecards, threat intelligence, developer reputation, SBOM, and so on. Anyway, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I seriously, this is early thinking. This is crayons and boxes and arrows level thinking. And so any input or ideas or feedback you have, I would really welcome. Michael, I see your hands up.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree that this sort of thing works really well. It worked really well at KubeCon when we showed off Guac. And I think to kind of tie it back into Guac, I think the thing that a lot of folks are interested in is they are interested in like, hey, so I have this SLSA metadata, what do I do with it? Or how does this fit into the bigger picture? I think that really does help out, right? Because a lot of folks are like, at the end of the day, it is, you know, when you have SLSA metadata, you are tying an identity to some metadata that's making a claim, and then you can go back and say, hey, do I trust this, and so on. And then I think the thing that like really also started to click for folks was this idea that, as you were pointing out, about like, now we got to aggregate all this data, correlate it with, you know, correlate SLSA with your SBOMs, with the VEX, with all that sort of stuff. Great, because people are, you know, it's, you know, a lot of folks are like, hey, it's cool that I generated some SLSA. What do I do with this? Like, what's the purpose of it? And the purpose for a lot of folks is like, you know, if you just say, well, now you can see whether or not you have that SLSA metadata. You're like, okay, great. Well, that helps out just from the pure perspective of like, do I have provenance for it? But what happens if something goes wrong? How do I go back and say, okay, let me check? And like, yeah, I can go in and have a rule that says, builds that happen during these timeframes, you know, those are bad, or builds that use this commit ID, those are bad, or we need to, you know, whatever. But like, that's really not a whole lot. Whereas when you start to say, no, but if you have hundreds of SLSA attestations and you can correlate it with all the other metadata that's starting to come up out there, you can ask those richer questions like, you know, hey, I have a build, so I know this build is probably secure. And if I go and I look at that git commit ID and I go back and I realize like, oh, it turns out that git commit ID introduced a, you know, I don't know, a SQL injection attack. We know that we've had SQL injection attacks for up until some other recent thing and stuff like, and if you're not doing the aggregation and synthesis, you don't get that. And then finally, you know, you can then tie it all together with the policy and insight. I think the thing that we've seen as well is a lot of folks are like, they've only been thinking about the policy and insight piece on a SLSA attestation at a time, when they really should be thinking about it more holistically of like, even though SLSA itself is not transitive, if you do have SLSA attestations for your dependencies, and if you do have SLSA attestations across your environment, you can start to ask some of those other questions, which I think is really useful.
Absolutely. And you brought up trust as well. And I think that there's an important element here about how we anchor trust. And I think, you know, some of this, there's a document which I posted in, I think either SLSA positioning or the S2C2F Slack channel, trying to, you know, tease apart S2C2F and SLSA. And one of the things there is, you know, where is trust anchored in this ecosystem? And I think, you know, with SLSA, trust is anchored in the builder. And so when you're thinking about why should I trust this attestation? Well, it's because this given builder signed it. And so my trust is anchored there. With S2C2F, the trust tends to be anchored in the organization or an auditor of the organization. It's the organization saying we perform these practices. But these trust anchors have different scale properties. And so looking at, you know, SLSA in a very simplistic use case here where each of these four consumers have varying types of trust or not in GitHub the builder. You could imagine, you know, here's an auditor use case where there's some delegated trust that's transitively given. And so, you know, consumer C here trusts the OpenSSF, who's delegated a trail of bits, who has then audited GitHub and so on. I think actually this picture here, where we use package distributors or package repositories as a trust boundary, consumers already trust PyPI, consumers already trust Maven, implicitly anyway. And so using package managers as a trust boundary has these useful properties that in this picture, these consumers don't need to know anything about the upstream builder. It's the package distributors which are actually doing the assessments upstream and looking at, transitively what trust needs to be upstream, and then what trust can I pass down in a VSA to individual consumers. And so I think that there's a certain, in Salsa land, that there's a certain amount of kind of hand waviness around how trust is anchored today. Like we say that GitHub Actions can produce Salsa level 3 artifacts. Why do we do that? We do that because we trust GitHub when they've told us that their builder is architected in a particular way and satisfies hermeticity and ephemerality and isolated build environments and so on. We go, okay, well, that meets Salsa level 3, but there's an inherent trust in GitHub there, which is, I think, not sufficiently explored or articulated around Salsa. And so I want to try and paint that picture as well, is that when we're asking people to make policy at the edge, we're asking them to make trust decisions upstream of them. And where those trust decisions are anchored is super important. Anyway, I feel like I've monopolized a lot of this in answer to a fairly simple question, which is what you're going to be blogging about. And the short answer is this is what I hope to be blogging about this quarter.
This has been good. I don't mind. Thanks, Isaac. So
Yeah.
You said you were promising your manager sometime this quarter, right?
That's it. I was
Sometime
actually
this
hoping
quarter.
my no meetings week this week would be a productive writing week, and yet here I am in a meeting.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you for that that overview. And do let us know if you need help with anything. Seems like you got it covered, but just in case. Okay, so folks, does anybody else have other items to discuss?
Isaac, is this presentation public or not?
Oh, he dropped off again.
Here, and I'll put it on the notes. Oh, there, he's coming back.
Yeah, it's back.
Are you there, Isaac? You're on mute if you're talking.
Sorry, I've lost audio again, so I'll switch back to my iPad. Sorry about that.
So there was a question that came up right as you dropped if this presentation was public.
I can absolutely share it. I'm happy to drop it in the Slack.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Okay, any other agenda items for folks on the call? Don't see hand raised. Does anybody object to us trying to continue the development blog so that we can try to progress that forward? Okay, so let me, so this is going to be changed into like a working session now. So obviously if folks can stay, fantastic. If not, it was nice having you for a little bit today. But let me share this, I think. But this is we don't know who the original owner was for the last one. We couldn't edit it, so we had to create a new one. So I lost the chat. Where is it? This is the new development blog location. And for folks that haven't been here for some of the discussions, we were thinking of two parts. The first one was how, where, and why in the development lifecycle. And then the second part, which is down here, would be how could they conform to SLSA? Some more detailed instructions on how that would happen. I think Jay did a really good job of kind of covering the first, why should developers consider SLSA and what's not covered in, by the SLSA levels, at least the ones that we're going to be discussing. And then some of the other questions that we want to ask are, what kind of problems can it catch from a development perspective or developer perspective? With outside of the boundary, and then a call to action. So it's supposed to be a relatively simple blog. But when we were doing the comparison last week, we did get hung up on some semantics of the wording of a benefit. So we kind of had to stop. So I'll stop speaking there and let folks chime in on what they would like to see or add. We can obviously start just typing away. I think everybody has the ability to add to this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And if I missed your name up here, by all means, feel free to add it. I took the last session's meeting, the attendees from the last session meetings to remind myself who started this. Okay. So what problems can it catch? What use cases do you think we should discuss from a developer perspective? Why they care about SLSA level 1 and SLSA level 2? I know it's after lunch for some people, but not everybody.
So can you repeat the SLSA 2 question again? I'm just trying to.
Basically, we're trying to tell the developer why they should care about SLSA. So what kind of use cases do we want to talk about to say, hey, developer, this is why you would care about something being SLSA level 1 or SLSA level 2.
Just to make sure that I remember that you discussed in the past, just to make sure that it's the part 1 will be one that it's more focused on why.
Yes.
And part 2 will be more how, right?
Correct.
Okay.
This is I guess a how is more of like how is very light.
Yeah.
How it helps, right? How it helps, where it helps.
Yeah, usually I remember the discussion was part 1, it was why should I care? Yeah. And put in a big picture. And the 2 will be more, okay, I got it. How
Correct.
I can do it, how I can
Correct.
implement. Okay.
Yeah, how can implement? Yeah, because it would require a lot longer blog. How can implement?
Or a book.
Yeah.
I think one of the observations I'd share, and maybe we can make sure we're aligned on this, is talking about the value of SLSA, I think that there's 3 potential audiences for the value of SLSA. I think audience number 1 is like the community and the ecosystem at large. And the value of SLSA there has been just like providing a center of gravity for discussion, a common set of terms, a common framework, a language, a way of talking about the same things using the same words, and just crystallizing a disparate set of concepts about supply chain down to a single set of vocabulary and way of thinking about it. I think then there's SLSA as provides value to the person building software, like as kind of building their own software at a particular SLSA level. And actually, where the value seems to me most prominent is in people consuming artifacts, that they can put more trust in an artifact which has a higher SLSA level. And so I think, part of what's difficult about driving SLSA adoption is that the costs of implementing SLSA are on a builder of software. The benefits of SLSA tend to accrue to the consumers of software, and I think that's difficult just from an adoption perspective, but it's possibly something which we should put in the framing of how we think about it here. That right now we're talking about the benefits to the developer of implementing their builds at SLSA levels. I think the more relevant value is the consumer who no longer has to bear the cost of those upstream risks, if that makes sense. Actually, the benefits of me as an OSS maintainer producing SLSA conformant builds is difficult to articulate. I mean, if it was easy, I think we'd see SLSA adoption move much quicker. I think part of the friction we have with adoption is that the value accrues to the consumer and the cost is borne by the producer, if that makes sense.
And then the value. Yeah, I'm trying to type what you said.
I don't mean to derail this, but maybe, I guess maybe we should think about not just kind of why, from the perspective of why should I implement SLSA for my build, but why, and the broader why, like what other, what value might I be providing to users of my software, rather than what value might I realize personally, if that makes sense. Because I think that second question can be tricky, and actually it could be that a given software producer would look at SLSA as pure cost. I don't get anything from doing this. It just costs me money. It just costs me complexity in my builds. All of the value is to consumers.
I would consider developers consumers because of the dependencies and the transitive dependencies.
I think that's true, but I guess I'm saying that the person who is building software at a given SLSA level is typically not the person who benefits from that work. The person it's the consumer of the artifact who has the benefit and the lowered risk profile and the greater assurance of upstream integrity and so on. And they may conceivably be the same actor, but in most cases they're not.
Michelle, you have your hand up, if I said the name right.
Yes, that's correct. Hi. Hi, Isaac. Sorry to be late, but I actually tell this narrative a lot or I formerly have as a product security architect. And my take on this is, sure, you can use FUD, the standard, like look at the supply chain attacks as a justification, but I focus on the quality aspect, that it benefits everyone to write to produce quality product, and that would include using SLSA levels. And I also emphasize that the idea of it's part of my tactic and my approach, which is security is a feature of a product, and that ultimately it saves you time, money, and effort by integrating security processes and secure components to your product. That's typically my approach to this, if that helps. And yes, I think it's like a healthcare analogy. Like you have in community health, you have primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention is actually the cheapest, but the results aren't immediately seen, like exercising and eating well, right? It's much sexier to talk about how you treat cancer than how you prevent it way ahead, right? And I think that's what we're looking at, and I encourage you to sort of use some of the sort of community health language. For example, I'm really a fan of moving upstream over shift left, because it really provides more rationale and sort of a bigger picture, as a macro practitioner, of how you need to look at the health of your complete software development lifecycle. And that if you're putting in unhealthy components, like if you're eating junk food, then you may see an impact way down the road. I think that you can make that narrative interesting and attractive, but it might be different than some of the narratives and messaging that we've used in the past. Is that helpful or fair?
I love that. I love that analogy. I mean, yes, I think the analogy is useful, and I think to whatever extent that we can talk about this stuff in terms that people readily understand from other parts of their world, that's always super helpful. I still think that there is the problem that, for a given open source maintainer, the cost of their product being insecure is not typically borne by them. is borne by users, and so that's an externality for the maintainer. And I think that the problem that we have is when we look at moving those costs and saying, oh well, now actually SLSA build, you're going to have to bear some of these costs yourself. That's just in terms of the incentives, particularly around open source, it can become tricky. But I love the analogy, and I'll certainly be using it.
And I think we tried to do some of that, right? We were like, when we first started last week, we were like, well, it reduces human error, right? It increases consistency across builds, increases efficiency of build time and technically release or time to release, right? Because that's what companies care about also, not only just cost, but how efficient is it to actually build your software over time, and how consistent is it, because consistency also drives efficiency, right? So we were these were the three that we could identify last week. But I like this preventative versus reactive analogy with healthcare. And I'm trying to see what else was there. Attack vectors moves. We did write this last week for level 2, the attack vector or the responsibility moves. So basically, instead of the developer caring about potentially caring about a compromised package, it's really the DevSecOps team or the IT team. I don't know if that's a real benefit, but that's something that I think we saw last week. We were thinking maybe that's a benefit to the developer. They don't want to worry about security. They want to transfer that task to somebody else. And maybe this would also help them. If something is level 2, then they don't necessarily have to worry about security as much because it's being handled more upstream.
I added the note about the whole narrative, if that makes it easier for you to grab that language. There's also something called the spectrum of prevention. If you've never seen that in healthcare, I can certainly put that in there, because I think people understand, even senior leaders like who are not technical and want justification for maybe why they need certain tools that support supply chain security, that might resonate better with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts on maybe use cases or narratives, additional narratives that we might want to consider for this?
I think one element that you should disclose, because it's a common question, it's not only the value that you can extract adopting SLSA, but as well, it's expected that, for example, the CI pipeline becomes lower, or there is no change, or you expected that even because you have more accountability and less error because you have more accountability, be faster. That's a kind of debate that sometimes you have when you're talking about supply chain.
Can you clarify for me, because I'm not sure I 100% understood. Are you talking about like the performance if you're doing
the development life cycle? It's become faster, slower, or there's no change?
I think it depends on how you architect it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a fair question. Oh, look like that it's a lot of more steps, so I'm expecting that it slow down. Not exactly. So I think that it's something that in the blog maybe we can address.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, some people say, oh, the more tests, it's the longer it takes. This is really what's it called? I can't really remember the term right now. I'm just going to say fallacy for now.
Mm-hmm.
But I get what you're saying. So do we want to put this in here, or do we want to put this more on the part 2, which is, you know, what do you need to do to conform to SLSA?
No, I think that we can at least address in the first part, and the second part, how you make this that do not affect the agility of the development life cycle. But because why you of course to talking about all the strategies and everything regarding why should I care about salsa. But one thing that it's of course a latent question, it's and about agility, speed. It's something that is slow down, creates some barriers, or things like that that are probably in the mind of the reader.
Makes sense. I think, where can we?
Are you familiar with the DevSecOps manifesto?
Yeah. Do you want us
the-
to reference it here?
It might, I mean, it's a good reminder. I always use it in anytime I talk about product security, because to the point about, you know, why are we doing this when it might just, when we won't see any immediate benefits? And I think it's a reminder to anybody who's thinking about it and achieving those levels, that it's like the guardrails for that, right?
Yeah.
If that helps.
I'm wondering if we should, do we think we should cover that in the why they should consider SLSA? Or is this more of,
I think
Not
it's more, I'm sorry. I think it's more about demonstrating that that's sort of the foundational health check for, you know, does that make sense?
yeah, I'm trying to think of a good area for it. Like we have a what is, like the why and the what is outside the boundary, but I'm trying to think of, I said fallacy earlier and I still can't think of the dang word. You know how they, like there's misnomers, or there's a better word for it. I can't think of it. Something that somebody thinks it's true, but it's not. It's never true, but for some
You
reason,
mean like an urban legend, or?
yeah, kind of like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of a section maybe that says, like, you know, these are myth versus fact. There you go, myth. Myth
Yeah.
versus fact. There you go. Versus fact.
Yeah, and I think the DevSecOps manifesto can sort of speak to, I mean, if you were using that as your North Star for your behavior, you know, for how you interact, right? I think that sort of sets the tone, that establishes a baseline of behavior when you're doing this, right?
Yeah, I wonder. I'm wondering if that should be at the beginning, but I don't know. I guess we can figure that out later. Trying to find a good area for this. Okay. So what, and this right here, these are like the levels. We just copied and pasted what we found on the website, the benefits of level 1 versus level 2 and what they were trying to go after. So those are more facts based off of what we have on the website. One of the things I don't think we came to conclusion on was about the source discussion. Right, version 1 does not have anything to do with source. The only exception is they do mention SBOM. But that's it. They mention that it can create an SBOM. So do we call that out to say, you know, 1.0 source is still being discussed and therefore it's outside of the boundary of this discussion? Do we mention, I know we mentioned SBOM earlier or last week, but do we mention it at all, given the source discussion can't be had?
I think it's, you're starting from a place of transparency the second you create an SBOM. And there's a lot to be said for that. Just, I mean, it's an on-ramp, right? An SBOM is an on-ramp into supply chain security.
I like that.
I'm real good with those. DevRel, what can I say?
Yeah, I like that. I'm not so good with words. I'm good with pictures, just not so much with words. You pair me up with an awesome writer, and I can draw you pictures.
Okay, I'll remember that.
I think Jay can attest to that. I can do pictures. Words are hard for me. See. Anything else that maybe we should try to? It looks like well, maybe it's just my perception. I feel like we're very close to having this written. We just need to kind of start typing it out, but I can't imagine it taking too long to finish this. Thoughts from the team? Maybe some people eating their lunch because they're West Coast time. Tough crowd today. Eat too much Halloween candy yesterday.
Yeah, maybe that's it. There's a lot of candy out there. Are you looking for some wordsmithing, some proactive wordsmithing on this? Or
Oh yeah, I feel like the more help, the merrier, right? Like
okay.
I try to write as much as I can. I'm not a writer. Never been. It takes me forever and a day just to write 500 words.
Oh, I have to do that
Yeah.
every week lately for
Yeah.
grad school. So I'm happy to, that's why I was asking. I don't want you to feel offended if I jump in.
Oh
So
no, by no means. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, this is a group blog, trying to put it out as a positioning group.
Okay.
And we just started writing. I think most of the really good writing is from Jay. It's not from me. I just kind of write, I think in bullets, and I write in bullets. So that anytime you see a bullet, it was probably me. So, so yeah, anybody that's willing to help with, wordsmithing this, writing it up, making it all nice and pretty, by all means.
Nope.
Again, I'm really good at pictures, just not at words.
Yeah, I can roll up the sleeves and start working as well. I thought that were holding the pen for this, but if you
Nope.
okay, good. So
Nope.
are you jumping in?
Yeah, anybody can jump in, and I think anybody can edit it. I think originally nobody could edit it, but they could only suggest.
Yeah,
So
I
if
saw here that
somebody,
I can edit as
you
well.
can? Okay, perfect. So Michelle, if you feel free to see if you can type in it outside of the comments. So if you don't have access, I can give you access, but everybody
No, I
should
do.
have.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. I'll see if I can like give you a couple of paragraphs of stuff. My voice tends to be very specific, but I'm sure you can like wordsmith and manipulate it to benefit the blog itself.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else from folks? I know it looks like we lost Mike. But for folks that are still around, that have been quiet, thoughts, questions? Oh, okay. Well, then I will let everyone go. I'll probably just stick around and keep, playing with this document, but I don't want to hold anybody up. So
Okay.
if you need to leave early, by all means, feel free to leave early.
Okay.
Okay,
I
thanks,
just got
everyone.
my agenda to read. I have my own process to working on.
Yep.
I need big
Yep.
chunks, yeah, of time.
I completely understand.
Okay,
That okay. Bye everyone. Thanks for joining.
thank
See you
you.
next week.
Bye now.
Bye.